Education is back in the news for good reason. Donald Trump is working on at least reining in the U.S. Department of Education, maybe not quite shuttering it, despite what you may have heard in the fake news. Meanwhile, in Illinois, a test project is underway. They're trying to drastically limit the freedom of homeschoolers and bring everybody under government control. And the same thing is happening in conservative states, by the way, although it's happening under different guises. So we're going to try to get to all of that on today's episode. Welcome to Behind the Deep State. I'm your host, Alex Newman, senior editor at the New American Magazine. You can find us at thenewamerican.com. It's a great honor and a privilege to be able to spend this time with you. And folks, nobody wants the Department of Education shut down more than I do. Okay. I've been exposing this stuff for my entire career in journalism. 15 years now I've been working on exposing this stuff. But there's a few things to say even before we get into this. We need to understand this isn't, even if we could shut down the Department of Education, which I hope will happen, but that's not what's happening right now. But even if we could do that, this is being portrayed as cutting off the head of the snake. And unfortunately, that is not a good way to look at it, right? If the Department of Education was the head of the snake, that would imply that everything was fine and dandy before we got the Department of Education, and that is simply untrue. The public education system was a dumpster fire long before 1979 when the U.S. Department of Education was created, and even if we shut down the Department of Education tomorrow, government schools would remain a dumpster fire. So we'll look a little bit into the origins of that. I go through them very extensively in my book, Indoctrinating Our Children to Death, Government Schools' War on Faith, Family, and Freedom. We'll look into the history of how it even came to happen that the government took charge of education, as it's so called. Now, let's go to the big news of the day, and that is the supposed shutting down of the U.S. Department of Education. Now, we've got federal lawsuits flying. We'll talk about that. We've got Democrat lawmakers and governors whining and threatening to stop this no matter what. And with that all as the backdrop, President Donald Trump on March 20th, so just very recently, issued his long-awaited executive order on education. And it is making very, very significant waves. I mean, the whole country has an opinion about this, depending on whose data you believe. Quite a few Americans are upset about this. But I want to start by pointing out the obvious. This thing doesn't do what a lot of the people who are commenting on this think it does, or at least say they think it does. Now, it's true that the workforce at the U.S. Department of Education is being downsized, pretty dramatically, in fact. If you look, even before the order by Donald Trump was issued, we had some very, very significant cutbacks in the U.S. Department of Education. We had, among other things, a letter sent to the staff there. And again, this is all before Trump's order by Secretary of Education Linda McMahon. It was called Our Department's Final Mission. And she talked about how the department had already burned through over $1 trillion. The student outcomes were consistently languishing. Very charitably, she said that less than a third of students are even proficient in any core subjects, which is true, by the way. And again, that's being very, very charitable. She said a lot in this letter. It's worth reading. In fact, there's very little to disagree with in there. It's just a lot of factual stuff. She said millions of young Americans are trapped in failing schools, subjected to radical anti-American ideology, saddled with college debt for a degree that has not provided a meaningful return on their investment or the taxpayers' investment, as the case may be. She says the reality of our education system is stark, and the American people have elected President Trump to make significant changes in Washington. Our job is to respect the will of the American people and the president they elected, who has tasked us with accomplishing the elimination of bureaucratic bloat here at the Department of Education, a momentous final mission, quickly and responsibly. Now, the whole letter, I think, is really worth reading. But one of the things she talks about in there is how they're going to be reducing the department, which I think is obviously a very, very positive development. By the time that had happened, they had already notified a lot of the staff to stop coming in, depending on whose news reports you're looking at. Maybe half of the employees have been told that they're not going to be having a job there. Now, there's a whole lot of confusion there. The courts are like, well, yes, you can work there. No, you can't. And so we'll see. But all the employees, for at least the time being, were told not to come back to the office until further notice. We've had at least $500 million worth of contracts and grants identified by the Department of Government Efficiency being canceled so far. A lot of these have to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion and the crazy gender-bending extremism and other programs. And so that's all good. But again, to get back to reality here, just because you've told a lot of the staff to stop coming in or you've told a lot of the staff that they may not be working there doesn't mean that we're shutting down the U.S. Department of Education. So, and in fact, again, this isn't like me just being a party pooper, okay? A lot of the key people, including Trump, including Secretary of Education Linda McMahon, are acknowledging publicly that a lot of the most important responsibilities of the U.S. Department of Education are not being ended. In fact, they're just being shifted, not to state governments and local governments, like your fake news will tell you, but really to other federal departments, other federal agencies. So I want to look at these. You got now the March 20th order. It's called Improving Education Outcomes by Empowering Parents, States, and Communities. And it calls on U.S. Secretary of Education Linda McMahon to shrink the department as much as she legally can. It asks her to return education authority to the states, but only, and this is key, to the maximum extent appropriate and permitted by law. Okay, so let's focus on this before we get into the details of where some of these functions are being shifted. Now, in the executive order, Trump said quite a few things about this, and we'll get to those. But I want to show you from the signing ceremony what he had to say about this issue of the states and the children. So let's roll that clip.
Today we take a very historic action that was 45 years in the making. In a few moments I will sign an executive order to begin eliminating the Federal Department of Education once and for all. The United States spends more money on education by far than any other country, but yet we rank near the bottom of the list in terms of success.
We both believe very much that education should be tailored to communities, that parents should have involvement, that local superintendents are the ones working with our teachers with full transparency of what education curriculum should be.
The department's useful functions, such as Pell Grants, Title I funding, resources for children with disabilities and special needs, will be preserved. We're going to be returning education very simply back to the states where it belongs, and we want to have our children well educated. We want them to love going to school.
All right, now setting aside the wisdom or lack thereof of having states be in charge of education, I would argue, and I will argue, that parents ought to be in charge of education, not state government or local government, certainly not the federal government. So what we're talking about here with Trump's executive order, as he himself said, we're going to be preserving a lot of these functions. They're going to go to other agencies. And again, this is a good baby step in the right direction, maybe, but a lot of these programs with the federal strings are going to be preserved, as you just heard the president explain. He also said that we want to return our students to the states, where just some of the governors here are so happy about this. He said they want education to come back to them, to come back to the states, and they're going to do a phenomenal job. I might quibble with that as well. I don't think Governor Gavin Newsom or Governor J.B. Pritzker in Illinois or any of these Democrat governors, certainly, and even a lot of the Republican governors, are going to be doing a great job when it comes to education. Not that they'll be free to do what they want. Of course, the federal system will still stay largely in place, at least for now. Before we go any further, I want to let you see what Trump said about the U.S. government spending money and the results that we are getting. It actually is pretty remarkable, but let's play this clip.
After 45 years, the United States spends more money on education by far than any other country, and spends likewise by far more money per pupil than any country, and it's not even close, but yet we rank near the bottom of the list in terms of success. It's an amazing stat. Those are two stats you don't want. The most money spent per pupil, and you're at the bottom of the list. And that's where we are, like it or not, and we've been there for a long time. 70% of eighth graders are not proficient in either reading or in math. 70%. 40% of fourth graders lack even basic reading skills, can't read. Students in our public elementary and middle schools score worse in reading today than when the department opened, by a lot. In Baltimore, 40% of the high schools have 0 students who can do basic mathematics.
Now, everything he just said is true, right? Everything he just said is absolutely true. And it's actually worse than you would think, because if you look, for example, at the data sources, they're talking about the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which I would argue is extremely dumbed down, right? If you knew what they consider to be proficient, you would be appalled, right? This is not something that a normal, reasonably well-educated person would consider to be proficient. So we have a very significant problem here. There's no doubt about it. And Trump, I think, is genuinely trying to do the right thing. But what we will see is there are political pressures and there are legal issues with doing that. So if you keep reading in Trump's executive order, and you can find it on the White House website, it demands, and I'm quoting here, uninterrupted delivery of services, programs, and benefits on which Americans rely. Now, if you think about this for a moment, that is kind of conflicting with the idea that we're going to shut it down. If we want to preserve uninterrupted delivery of these services, programs, and benefits, and also shut them down, I mean, both of those things cannot happen at the same time, right? So it wasn't really clear how the federal boot print in education was going to be seriously downsized, much less eliminated, while also making sure that those services and programs and benefits on which Americans rely continue to be administered, right? Those are contradictory goals. So I think there are a lot of chefs in this kitchen, and they're all trying to put their little piece in, and it's becoming a little bit confusing. Now, to fulfill those demands, right, that these services and programs and benefits, as they call federal entitlement programs, continue, what they're doing is actually just moving a lot of these functions over to other departments. So one of the very obvious ones, you've got Linda McMahon admitting publicly that a lot of these functions are going to be preserved. Here's what she said recently about, for example, some of the quote-unquote civil rights stuff. Listen to what she had to say in a recent interview with the Daily Caller.
To ask a question on the Office of Civil Rights. Obviously, the Office of Civil Rights has opened a bunch of investigations into anti-Semitism, Title IX violations. What happens to the Office of Civil Rights under this executive order? Will the Office of Civil Rights continue to work investigating schools that violate the law?
Well, certainly the executive order did not specify what happens with any of the departments within education. So we are looking at where best those departments could be located. I mean, the Department of Justice already has a civil rights office, and I think that there is an opportunity to discuss with Attorney General Bondi about locating some of our civil rights work there.
Okay, so we're going to discuss with the Department of Justice putting some of these programs, these quote-unquote civil rights programs, into the DOJ. Now, do I think Pam Bondi and the Trump administration DOJ is going to be using this to terrorize conservative states that don't allow boys and girls bathrooms and things like that? No, of course not, right? We all know we've got a little bit of a reprieve here from some of the most outrageous outrages. But we would be very, very naive to think that the next deep state Democrat puppet, even if they do move all this over to DOJ, would not use the DOJ to do this very thing. And how do we know? Well, because that's what the Biden administration did, right? If you remember, the Biden administration actually very vocally used the Department of Justice, the Civil Rights Office of the Department of Justice, to terrorize and bully local schools, local school districts that didn't want to participate in the weird gender stuff, in the letting boys and men into girls' bathrooms. I mean, they literally used the DOJ Civil Rights Enforcement to target these people, and they made it look like the DOJ was going to protect children from their own families, from their own communities, by pursuing them for these alleged civil rights violations. So this doesn't actually break the mechanism through which the federal government has imposed so much of this lawlessness and wickedness on our public schools. And it's not just the civil rights stuff, right? I want to let you listen here again to Secretary of Education Linda McMahon talking about this, as she points out that we're not going to be defunding a lot of these Department of Education programs. Rather, they're going to be absorbed by the Department of Health and Human Services and other agencies. Here she is admitting this.
I think the president was very clear. The outward-facing programs that are going to be affecting students there's not going to be any defunding for those programs. When he talked about student loans, that would be going to the Small Business Administration, and also then the programs for students with disabilities will more than likely rest in HHS, which, by the way, is where they began. I think we're looking at putting things in different departments where they can operate very efficiently as we look at how we can shut down the Department of Education.
Do they not operate efficiently now?
Not as well as they should be. As a matter of fact, the president campaigned on the fact that he wanted to close down the Department of Education. And what we saw with our scores recently with the NAEP, which is our country's report card, I mean, it's unacceptable where education is in our country today. And so the Department of Education does not educate one child. It does not establish any curriculum in any states. It doesn't hire teachers. It doesn't establish programs. Mm-hmm. What it is more of a pass-through of funding, which is appropriated by Congress, by the way. And so we want to make sure that that funding continues in the departments where it needs to be, but at the same time, give states the opportunities to be innovative and creative with their teachers.
All right, folks. So again, I'm not just trying to be annoying or contrarian or rain on the parade here. The reality is our own top officials are telling us that the federal involvement in education is not ending. And I think that's not what a lot of us wanted to hear, but it is the reality. And by the way, it's not just Linda McMahon saying this. The Department of Education acknowledged, they actually put out a public statement. They said the department will continue to deliver on all statutory programs that fall under the agency's purview, including formula funding, student loans, Pell Grants, funding for special needs students, and competitive grant making. Okay, that's a statement put out by the U.S. Department of Education. And Trump himself admitted as much, right? We just saw a little clip of him during the signing ceremony saying that these main functions were going to be preserved in full and redistributed to various other agencies and departments that will take very good care of them, as he said. So, folks, this is happening, right? He actually talked about this, how HHS was going to take over some of these programs just recently. Right? Here he is talking about this very thing. Check it out.
And also, Bobby Kennedy, the Health and Human Services, will be handling special needs and all of the nutrition programs and everything else. Rather complex, but that's going to be headed by and handled by Health and Human Services. So I think that'll work out very well. Those two elements will be taken out of the Department of Education, and then all we have to do is get the students to get guidance from the people that love them and cherish them, including their parents, by the way, who will be totally involved in their education, along with the boards and the governors and the states. And it's going to be a great situation. I guarantee that in a few years from now, I hope I'm going to be around to see it, but I think we're going to see a lot of it. I think that you're going to have tremendous results. You're going to have results like Norway, Sweden, Denmark.
All right, folks. Again, I don't think I can make this any more clear. I probably don't need to drive the point home anymore. But the federal involvement in education is not ending. Let's stop talking about it. And I've gotten a ton of emails, by the way, folks. Oh, what do you think of the Department of Education being shut down? And I keep having to say, guys, it's not being shut down, okay? The department will remain, and a lot of its functions are just being moved to other agencies. So what do we make of it? Now, Trump is saying some really important things, and he's changing the debate on this. One of the things that he said during the or in the executive order, he said, and I'm quoting here from the executive order, unfortunately, the experiment of controlling the American education through federal programs and dollars and the unaccountable bureaucracy those programs and dollars support has plainly failed our children, our teachers, and our families. Okay, he's absolutely right. He also pointed out that over $250 billion was spent on quote-unquote schools during the COVID pandemic, just during the pandemic, and just at the federal level, by the way. That's more than a quarter of $1 trillion in a period of a few years. Unbelievable, folks. And yet the kids are dumber now than ever before, according to the government's own data. So in the executive order, Trump also offered a brief history of how the teachers union was able to scam the American people into having this department created. They endorsed Jimmy Carter back in 1979, their first endorsement, and Jimmy Carter and Congress went ahead and created this Department of Education that they had been trying to create for ages, okay? For a long, long time. And I've got a whole chapter on that in my book. Even before we had the Department of Education, the system was totally rotten. The NEA had been advocating for not just a national Department of Education, but even a global school board going back many, many decades under the leadership of John Dewey and others. And by the way, the federal government's involvement in education didn't begin with the creation of the U.S. Department of Education. In 1962 and 63, the U.S. Supreme Court kicked Bible and prayer out of schools, right? That was way before we had a Department of Education. In 1965, the U.S. government, the Congress, passed the Elementary and Secondary Education Act that opened up the federal funding for public schools. So the Department of Education, yes, relatively new innovation, but this was not the beginning of federal involvement in education. It was not the beginning of the decline of government schools, and we need to be realistic about that. Now, continuing in Trump's order, he says that today American reading and math scores are near historical lows, and they are. It's true. He says this year's National Assessment of Educational Progress showed 70% of 8th graders were below proficient in reading. 72% were below proficient in math. The federal education bureaucracy is not working. And of course, he's absolutely right about that. He says closing the Department of Education would provide children and their families with the opportunity to escape a system that is failing them. I got to pause here for a minute because nobody, except maybe 1 in a million who are forced by court order to send their kids to a government school, is actually trapped in a failing system. Everybody in all 50 states right now can legally escape this system. There are different legal requirements in each state, but in all 50 states, you are more than welcome to pull your children out of this disastrous so-called education system, and nobody is going to say anything about it. Okay, you can do that right now. And yet, what we're seeing here is massive outrage by the Democrats in Congress, by the Democrats in other places. I want to show you a video of Tim Walz, the Minnesota governor, vice presidential candidate on the Democrat ticket. It's amazing how extreme this guy gets. I want to let you listen to this. It's unbelievable, the hysteria that we're seeing here with this.
You know, students like my son who depend on IDEA and individual education plans to make sure that they're treated equally and get the best possible education they can. That's a hallmark of America. I think America's great contribution to the world is our public education system. And of course, Donald Trump doesn't care. And I appreciate you showing that photo because it's so obscene that he would put a mock classroom. We all know he's never been in one. He wouldn't last for a minute. He's never done it. He's surrounded by people who know nothing about education. And they want to make this about bureaucracy and cutting. This is about children. This is about broadband access in their schools. This is about the research you were talking about, pedagogy, things that we learn. And then it's about the Civil Rights Department at the Department of Education that makes sure that we don't have a situation where a Ruby Bridges is escorted to school with police. And so we're back in an area where we can segregate. And he knows that curriculums and those decisions are made on a local basis, but they muddy the water. So look, just like your previous guest, thanks for having her on, but it's chilling. They don't care about law. They don't care about where the American public's at. And that kind of segues to why I'm getting out there. And there's a reason that these Republican Congress members aren't holding town halls, because this is so unpopular they can't defend it. But I'm going to make sure that the voices of their constituents are heard.
Yeah, says the guy who was on the presidential ticket and went down to a shocking, historic defeat, both with the popular vote and the electoral vote in the Electoral College. Folks, amazing, right? And of course, it's not just Tim Walz, right? It's all these guys. Chuck Schumer says that any effort to undo this department in Congress is dead on arrival in the U.S. Senate. They're saying it would take 60 votes to overcome a filibuster and get this done. You've also got Senator Elizabeth Warren, famous for lying about being an Indian, incredible unhinged response. She says, this is code red for every public school student, parent, and teacher in this country. Trump is telling public school kids in America that their futures don't matter. Billionaires like Trump and Musk won't feel the difference when the after-school programs are slashed, class sizes go up, and help for families to pay for school gets cut. But working families, students, and teachers will pay a heavy price. Now, the people paying a heavy price, folks, are the people who are being indoctrinated, dumbed down, and sexualized in this so-called education system. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, who, by the way, only needs a handful of GOP defections to win on this issue, issued an apocalyptic statement. The sky is falling, right? He says, shutting down the Department of Education will harm millions of children in our public schools, their families, and hard-working teachers. He says, Congress created the Department of Education. Only an act of Congress can eliminate it. We will stop this malignant Republican scheme in the House of Representatives and in the courts. The laid-off bureaucrats are screeching about this. ABC Fake News talked to a bunch of anonymous bureaucrats that got laid off, pulling on the heartstrings. Oh, it's been very hard. This one anonymous bureaucrat says, it really has been hard and heartbreaking because I was planning on having a career with the department. Yeah, sorry, you're going to have to go find something productive to do. I'm sorry, but the American people spoke with their vote. This is unconstitutional. You got to go find a real job. The left-wing NEA, by the way, which helped create this department, they've got over 3 million members. They pour huge amounts of money into our political process. They joined forces with the NAACP to try to have the federal courts stop this. The president of this thing, the NEA, Becky Pringle, says gutting the Department of Education will hurt all students by sending class sizes soaring, cutting job training programs, making higher education more out of reach, taking away special education services, and much more. Folks, we're almost out of time. It's amazing how fast this goes. But we need to understand here, ending unconstitutional federal involvement in education is just a baby step in the right direction. But that's not even what's happening here, right? It's not the cutting off the head of the snake. It's a redistributing of some of the functions. And we need to see the education system as a hydra. Right? It's got lots of tentacles, and all these tentacles are working together to devour your children, to destroy your children. And the U.S. Department of Education is just one of those tentacles. The teachers' unions, the state agencies, UNESCO, the woke publishers. I mean, all these are different tentacles working in unison to destroy kids. And you can cut off 1 or 2 or 3 of these tentacles, and the beast will keep eating your children, right? So we've got to realize that we need a much more serious effort here. Now, we do want to get the feds out of the classroom. Obviously, it's a worthwhile effort, but we need to make sure that's not the end of this process. The ultimate goal needs to be to have parents in charge of their own children's education, not state government, not local government, not HHS or any of these other agencies. And we can do that. If you go to jbs.org, we've got a campaign right now to save our children by shutting down the government school system. We've been working on this for a long, long time, and we're going to keep working on it. But I just wanted to share that with you. And I also want to turn just for a moment to Illinois, folks. In Illinois, they are pursuing a dramatic assault on homeschoolers. It's called HB 2827, the Homeschool Act. It was approved last week in a party line vote, 8-4 in the Education Policy Committee, and it's going to force homeschoolers to register like sex offenders. It's going to force them to hand over their stuff whenever the government demands it. Parents who don't comply with this regime could be jailed and have their children stolen from them. It's a nightmare of regulation in a state that historically, thanks to a state Supreme Court ruling, has had quite a bit of freedom. There may even be requirements on more data being submitted to the government, and the bureaucrats can actually just expand on that whenever they want. They can launch investigations of families whenever they want. It really is a disaster. Of course, the Democrats are pushing it. The opposition is absolutely amazing, folks. You've got even the far-left Chicago Tribune saying that they hope this bill dies, that it overreaches. And if you look at the public opposition, it's truly incredible. They had over 90,000 witness slips filed in opposition to this original bill and less than 500 in favor of the bill. So people are not happy with this attempt to bring homeschoolers under control. We know it's happening in Republican states, too, just under different guises, right? They're saying, oh, free money for everybody. All you have to do is report everything, take our tests, and then do what we want, which we know is exactly the strategy that the UN's education agency gave for bringing all students, private school, homeschool, under government control. So, folks, we're facing a full-on assault here. We have to stand firm. The education battle is the most crucial front in the battle against the deep state, right? The deep state's brainwashing your kids, sexualizing your kids, indoctrinating them, dumbing them down, and if we don't address this, we're not going to be able to successfully resist. I'm Alex Newman. This is Behind the Deep State. Get to thenewamerican.com for more. Until next time, thanks for watching, and God bless you all.
Have you heard the latest from the United Nations? They're telling us to eat bugs. They say that it's going to help save the planet. They're even developing a list of bugs for us to eat and regulating how they're going to bring them to us. I don't know about you, but I am not eating bugs. To learn more about what the United Nations has planned for you, visit thenewamerican.com to subscribe and get 25% off the cover price.